Okay, thanks for being here. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So appreciative for your participation in these videos. We're going to wrap up again. You don't know again, but this is my second go at trying to complete this Go show. I'm having all kinds of recording problems. My audio went kaput. 3 Tripitaka Masters Pray for Rain. I guess where we left off was right after his discourse on the history of the mistaken views in Japan being hundreds of years in the making, from Chikoku, who kind of betrayed his allegiance to the Tendai school, and for some reason, most likely political, he was swayed to start practicing the true word school teachings, which are full of errors. And anyway, so Nichiren points all of this out. And again, as a reminder, this is a letter to one of his lay monks in a region where he's a leader in the community, one of the ruling people in the community, but he's a practitioner of Nichiren's doctrine being the clear teachings of the Lotus Sutra. I say clear because Nichiren's whole scholarship is based on the correct reading of all Shakyamuni's teachings, culminating in the Lotus Sutra. And he's living at a time in Japan where a lot of other, for hundreds of years, political reasons, different schools have taken hold that have diminished the Lotus Sutra, haven't understood it, relegated it to lower teachings, added their own opinions on top of other opinions to pursue their own schools. I suspect it's easier to teach people to do mystical things than to simply rely on their own mind and their own exigencies, right? Buddhism is very self-directed. And, we live at a time when we have the capacity to be self-directed. Not always in a good way, but Buddhism is perfectly suited to us. However, in very authoritarian times, such as the shogunate in Japan was, and authoritarian governments have been around for ages. It's not like Japan created this, but at any rate, in those environments, people had struggled with the idea that they controlled their own lives, because everywhere in their lives they were controlled by others, right? Not because of, but certainly that weakness was validated very easily. So the idea that they could self-directedly achieve enlightenment was not one that took hold easily. It took a lot of effort to teach that, in other words. Whereas if you told people, well, you hold your hands this way and you do this, and here's a special little chant for you, and you chant that, and it's just for you, and you hold your hands like the mudras and mantras, right? Then you could easily convince more people that you were doing something that they might not understand, but that you did. And there's that authoritarianship again. People like to be told what to do, and all they need is somebody to rise up and say, I'm going to tell you what to do. So there's the equation of an authoritarianship, right? It also worked very nicely for their own gain, the teachers of these schools, politically, because they could demonstrate to the ruling class, see how many people I control, look at them all, I'll handle it, right? So it's a simplification, but honestly, that's the way the world works. So Nichiren comes along and he says, wait a minute, that's not Buddhism. You're destroying these people's own ability to enlighten themselves, to awaken their Buddha nature. You're turning them into sheep. You can't do this, right? So Nichiren rises up in his day as a scholar, and Nichiren, as you're going to hear as we close this letter out, is saying, look, I've given you some examples because you're a leader in your community, so you need to know this doctrinally, and you need to know that it's not just me, Nichiren, who's saying this. This is from the doctrines of Buddhism, the words of Shakyamuni Buddha himself. This isn't some weird thing I just made up. I'm just this guy who's pointing out, the correct teachings. So it's not with, there's a lot of humility in Nichiren, and it may not seem like it. The way these are translated makes him look like he's saying, well, I'm the special one. What he's saying is, it is special to practice Buddhism correctly. That's all he's doing, and he's pointing it out. So, anyway, so here we go. Moreover, he continues the letter, moreover, since the time of Chikaku and Chisho, the priests of the Tendai school have been constrained by the false wisdom of these men and developed their schools into something quite unlike what it once was. So this is what I was just saying, is that through history, through hundreds of years, these mistakes have been reinforced, commentaries written about them to justify them, and now we're in a situation where these schools are practicing something that's unrecognizable as Buddhism. It uses a lot of the terms and the talking points, but ultimately the way they practice is out there. And they don't know it themselves. Well, they may know it, but it's ingrained in several hundred years of culture, right? So it's hard to change that kind of thing. So Nichiren puts himself in the shoes of his lay people or his students in a way that's kind of unusual. We haven't seen this before, but it's because he's talking to a teacher of the Lotus Sutra doctrine, of the Nichiren doctrine. So he's imagining what he might be hearing from his students, right? So he there's this little quote here. Is this really true? Some of my disciples may be asking. Does Nichiren really have a superior understanding to that of Chikaku and Chisho, right? And then Nichiren says, but I'm only going by what the Buddha predicted in the sutras. In other words, what I just said, Nichiren himself is saying, I'm just quoting the words of Buddha, of Shakyamuni, that just reading the sutras is enough to dispel all these erroneous baloney. I'm not calling them out because I don't like them or I want to assert myself. I'm just showing them, hey, you got your shoes on the wrong foot. How can you vilify me for that? Right? He goes on. The Nirvana Sutra states that in the latter day of the law, those people who slander the Buddha's teachings and fall into the hell of incessant suffering as a result will be more numerous than the dust particles that comprise the land. Speak. While those who uphold correct teachings will be fewer than the specks of dirt one can pile on a fingernail. We've already heard this. And the Lotus Sutra says that even though there might be someone capable of lifting up Mount Sumeru and hurling it away, it will be hard indeed to find someone who can preach the Lotus Sutra just as it teaches in the latter day of the law of Shakyamuni Buddha. So, I don't know, is that compassionate for him to say? Is that a critique for him to say? Or is it just him again going, look, it's not me. Look, I'm reading it right out of the sutra. Shakyamuni, 2,200 whatever years ago, knew this was going to happen. And I'm pointing it out that it's happening. That's not my fault. It's just that it's happening. He goes on, the sutra's great collection, golden light, benevolent kings, protection, parinirvana, and sovereign kings record that when in the latter day of the law begins, if a person who practices the correct teaching should appear, then those who uphold false teachings will appeal to the ruler and his ministers. The ruler and his ministers, believing their words, will revile that single person who upholds the correct teaching, or attack him, send him into exile, or even put him to death. At that time, the king Brahma, Shakra, and all the other numerable deities, the powers of nature, as well as the heavenly and earthly deities, will take possession of the wise rulers of neighboring countries and cause them to overthrow the nation where these things take place. Doesn't the situation we face today resemble that described in these sutras? See, again, you can read all of this. He's quoting sutra. He's not making it up. And they are living through the exact words of the sutra. So he's saying, and again, he's structuring all of this because he wants to help not only the courage and the sympathies of his student, this monk of Nishiyama village in the Fuji district. He wants to encourage him. This is a letter ultimately thanking him for support that he's sending to Nichiren now in his later years living in Minobu, in a very not discreet but kind of remote place in Japan. He's settling into his satori, if you will, at his old age, and he's not traveling the country anymore, but he's sending as many letters to his followers as he can, encouraging both his lay believers, his students, directly, his inner circle, and these other monks who are helping to teach and spread Lotus Sutra's teachings. So that's why we're reading a lot of variety and form in the way he writes these letters. And so he's giving all these stories to this monk and encouraging him and saying, in a way, this is what you can share with your students. That Nichiren is pointing out what is in the sutras, not some abhorrent other teaching of his own. It's not an opinion piece. So you can be secure in your practice that you're practicing correctly because this is doctrinally correct. It's not a deviation. Do you see? So he continues, I wonder what good causes formed in your past lives have enabled you to visit me, Nichiren. But whatever you might discover in other words, again, this can sound very arrogant, but it's not. What he's saying is, I am staunchly upholding the correct practice. And I'm not the first in history to have done it. Tendai, Mialo, Dengyo, there's a whole history of bodhisattvas that have redirected and brought Buddhism back to center, exactly what it says as Shakyamuni taught it, and pushed away erroneous political whatever baloney that's been steeped upon it for personal gains, political gains, whatever, and gone back to the strictness of the doctrine, right? So what he's saying is, in your life, being a follower of the Lotus Sutra and studying, as I am pointing out, as a scholar of the Lotus Sutra, how to practice, then you must have great fortune in your life to have found an anchor, somebody, something, to directly to, and by extension, your followers, to practice the Buddha's teachings correctly. That in this time happens to be me, Nichiren. But it's not because me, Nichiren, is better looking, stronger, smarter. It's simply because I am following the scholarship strictly. So whatever has brought you to me is a reflection of how profound and courageous and ultimately correct your practices. See, he's not ingratiating himself. He's saying, because he stands as the votary of the Lotus Sutra in Japan at the time, that there must be great ability in this person who has found Nichiren, because that is what their commitment to the correct teaching is. It's a kind of a reverse encouragement. I don't want to use compliment is a word that has a lot of baggage attached to it, so I didn't want to use that. Okay. But whatever you might discover in examining your past, I'm sure that this time you will be able to break free from the sufferings of birth and death. Tripitaka was unable to memorize a teaching of 14 characters, even in the space of 3 years, and yet he attained Buddhahood. So this is to demonstrate that you don't need to be an intellectual genius to get Buddhism. Devadatta, on the other hand, had committed to memory 60,000 teachings, but he fell into the hell of incessant suffering, meaning he fell away from his dedication to the correct practice. So there's and we encounter this a lot, right? In Buddhism, if you're working toward your own enlightenment, you're a Buddhist. You're working toward your attainment of Buddhahood. But no matter how smart you are, how many things you memorize, how much you know of Buddhism, if you don't actualize it, if you don't actually commit to awakening your Buddha nature, and instead just walk around like, yeah, I know Buddhism, and go about doing whatever you want, without commitment, in other words, or your commitment is loose, and you commit to other leaders and stuff just to be a part of clubs and so forth, then you're not pursuing your enlightenment. So then you're an quote-unquote ordinary being, right? That's not to say that you're evil, but rather that you're simply not working toward your enlightenment, awakening your Buddha nature. What a sorrowful life. What a life of suffering. Right? If you know how to not suffer, why would you choose to suffer? So that's the dividing line, always, that we see creep up in these different ways. These examples exactly represent the situation in the world in this present latter age. Never suppose that they pertain only to other people and not to yourselves. So that's an important thing to say, because a lot of times when we read ancient writings, we think, well, that was for those people, that's what they needed to hear, but I'm a modern person. Things are different for me. And you know, I said it in the previous recording of this video, I hear myself repeating the same lesson only because the last video, the audio came out so horribly, I had to do it again. So, but I wanted to make the point that even though these are, the Gosho was written in the 13th century in Japan under a shogunate, another authoritarian government, we're seeing authoritarian governments spring up all over right now. And it's amazing to me that no matter how old the sutras are, and certainly the Gosho being the newest documentation from within Buddhism, the message, and even in the translations, even if they're oddly influenced by other thoughts or negations, the meaning comes through, because humans are humans, and we have the same habits, we have the same, remember, Buddhism is about the mind, and the human mind hasn't changed all that much. It's just our context, right? Our context today isn't about how to get a message to somebody who's 1,000 miles away, and all I've got is a horse or a friend who might be traveling that way, and get them a message in a few weeks. today we have the same problem, but it's instantaneous. In fact, it's so fast now that when we send an email, we can stop sending it in the middle of or not in the middle of, but after we send it, we have so many seconds that we can actually terminate it because we change our mind, right? Communication is so fast today that we've almost lost our responsibility for saying things, right? We email stuff, and 10 minutes later, it's like, oh, well, that's history. Don't pay attention to that. I'm saying this now. I mean, we change our minds so fluidly. It's amazing we can have consistency at all in our lives. So, but it's the same issue is what I'm saying. So that's an interesting thing for Nichiren to say, is that don't think as you read these stories that they don't apply to you. They do if you look at the meaning instead of getting stuck on the words. Look at the idea that's being explored here. This is always true. So he completes this letter with the following. There are many other things that I would like to say, but I'll stop here. I do not know how to thank you for all that you've done in these troubled times. So I have here outlined for you some important points in our doctrine. Thank you for the cowpeas and the green soybeans, Nichiren. So, as I suspected as I was reading it, this was, this has been a troubled time in Japan for quite a while, and certainly Nichiren's own experience is very in the moment of crisis in Japan, with the Mongols invading and all the disasters going on, let alone the authoritarianship that's like trying to drive him into the ground and shut him up. So it's an interesting letter. Interesting in that its audience is specific to a monk who's a leader in his community and obviously teaching other students, much like you and I, right? So he's encouraging him by using the teachings themselves. So it's a reminder to us to study Buddhism broadly, as Shakyamuni said and taught. And also to keep in mind that our study is very much personal. That we don't study for the benefit of understanding history or other people's foibles, any of that. That our focus must be on the meaning of the teachings, because the meaning, the ideas in the teachings are contemporaneous. They're very much about our lives and how our minds work. And that is ultimately what Buddhism is. If you understand how your mind is constantly distracted, and it's not about ending the human mind. It's not nihilistic. It's about hearing all those monkeys and quieting them down so that you, in this moment, can focus and think clearly. Because when you do, so much appreciation wells up for the life that you have and the life around you, that all of the monkeys screaming in the background, right? We've talked about the monkey mind, all the distractions and everything. They just sort of quiet down and they become part of the environment, like blades of grass. And so rather than being obstacles and distractions, they become a lovely pasture of a pastiche of the life process. This is the clarity of the Buddha mind, right? You become unaffected. Being unaffected, not effected, affected, is because you detach from those things. You don't annihilate them. Remember, meditation from the get-go was about ceasing the formations, not the things themselves, but the attachments, the affectations, the influence. Deep breath. All you things are just a wonderful shag carpet for me to walk through. That life is something much more immense and precious. Experience that. That is your real life. All this other chatter is samsaric distraction. And this is what Nichiren is constantly trying to get people to. Okay? Anyway, thanks so much for participating in this grand experiment of Buddhism. Take care of your health and strengthen your practice. You know how to do it. A little bit of study, some chanting, focus, mandala, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. It's real simple. Take care of yourself.